The shuttle docked at orbital station Artemis 7 with a soft hiss of pressure locks. Grace stood up slowly from her seat, feeling the familiar ache in her left leg. She was 52 years old, her brown hair streaked with gray, and she carried only a single bag. The other passengers rushed past her, eager to reach their new assignments. Grace took her time. She had learned long ago that rushing rarely changed anything. The station was beautiful. Through the viewing windows, she could see the blue curve of Earth below and the endless darkness of space above. Young officers in crisp uniforms walked through the corridors with purpose and ambition in their eyes. Grace noticed how they looked at her and then looked away. She was older than most of them. Her uniform was clean but worn. She did not look like someone important. A young ensign met her at the arrivals area. He checked his tablet and frowned slightly when he saw her name. "Lieutenant Commander, you're assigned to the logistics department. I'll show you the way." He walked fast, and Grace followed at her own pace. The ensign kept looking back with barely hidden impatience. Grace did not speed up. Her leg hurt today, and she had nothing to prove to a boy who had probably never seen anything more dangerous than a simulation. The logistics department was located in the lower sections of the station. The corridors here were narrower and less polished. The ensign left her at the door without another word. Grace stepped inside and found herself in a large room filled with desks and screens. About 20 officers worked here, most of them young. They looked up when she entered, studied her for a moment, and then returned to their work. She could read their thoughts on their faces. Another old officer sent here to wait for retirement. Another failure who could not make it anywhere else. A tall man with perfectly styled hair approached her. His uniform had extra decorations that suggested family money and political connections. He smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "Lieutenant Commander, I'm Commander Price. I run this department." He shook her hand briefly. "Your desk is in the back. Lieutenant will explain your duties." He walked away before Grace could respond. A young woman with sharp features and cold eyes appeared beside her. Lieutenant Amy looked Grace up and down like she was inspecting something unpleasant. "Follow me," Amy said. The desk in the back was the smallest in the room. It was positioned near the waste recycling units, and Grace could hear them humming constantly. Amy handed her a tablet. "You'll be handling supply inventory reports. Check the numbers, fix any errors, file them in the system. Simple work." The way she said simple made it clear what she thought of Grace's abilities. "Any questions?" "No," Grace said. "Thank you." Amy walked away without another word. Grace sat down at her small desk and began to work. The days that followed were all the same. Grace arrived early and left late. She did her work quietly and efficiently. She ate lunch alone because no one invited her to join them. She heard the whispers and the laughter that stopped when she walked past. She noticed the looks of contempt from Lieutenant Amy and her friend Lieutenant Daniel Grant. They were both from wealthy families, both assigned to this station through connections rather than merit. They treated the logistics department like a temporary stop on their way to better things. One afternoon, Grace was walking to the supply room when she heard voices around the corner. "Did you see her leg?" That was Daniel's voice. "She walks like my grandmother. Why do they even send people like her here?" "Probably got demoted from somewhere," Amy replied. "I heard she was on some cargo ship during the war. Nothing special. Just survived by hiding somewhere safe while real soldiers did the fighting." "Pathetic. At least she knows her place, sitting in the back like the relic she is." They laughed together, and Grace stood still in the corridor. She could have walked around the corner and confronted them. She could have told them the truth about where she had been during the war, what she had done, what she had lost. But she thought of all the faces she would never see again, all the friends who had died screaming in the darkness of space, and she decided that the opinions of two spoiled children did not matter. She turned and walked back to her desk. The alien liaison officers noticed everything. The consortium had sent 3 representatives to the station as part of a diplomatic exchange. They were tall beings with silver skin and large dark eyes that seemed to absorb light. In their culture, age meant wisdom. Elders were treated with deep respect. They watched how the humans treated Grace, and they found it strange. One of them, a senior diplomat named, approached Grace one evening when she was working late. "You are older than the others," said. His voice was soft and musical. "Yet they treat you with disrespect. Why do you allow this?" Grace looked up from her screen. She studied the alien's face and saw genuine curiosity there. "They are young," she said simply. "They do not understand some things yet." "What things?" Grace was quiet for a moment. "They do not understand that surviving is sometimes harder than dying. They do not understand that the people who talk the loudest about war have usually never seen it." Tilted his head. "You speak like a warrior." "I was many things during the war," Grace said. "Now I am just a logistics officer. That is enough." Studied her for a long moment. There was something in her eyes that he recognized, something he had seen in the oldest warriors of his own people, a deep tiredness that came from seeing too much death, a quiet strength that did not need to prove itself. "I think," said slowly, "that you are more than you appear." Grace smiled, but it was a sad smile. "We are all more than we appear. That is the tragedy of being alive." She returned to her work and walked away with new questions forming in his ancient mind. He decided to watch this human more closely. There was a story here, hidden beneath the surface, and the had always been collectors of stories. In the days that followed, Grace continued her work. She filed reports and checked inventories and ate her meals alone. She did not complain when Commander Price gave her extra duties. She did not react when Amy and Daniel made jokes at her expense. She simply existed, quiet and patient, like a stone in a river waiting for the water to pass. But stones, as the young officers would soon learn, could have sharp edges hidden beneath their smooth surfaces. And some rivers carried secrets from very dark places indeed. The warship arrived at Orbital Station Artemis 7 on a cold Tuesday morning. Grace watched from her desk as the massive vessel docked at the outer ring. They were a warrior species, tall and heavily muscled with rough gray skin and eyes like burning coals. They had fought alongside humanity during the Hegemony War 15 years ago. They were brutal and proud, and respected only strength. The ship needed repairs after a battle with pirates near the outer colonies. Standard procedure said they would receive fuel, supplies, and technical assistance, but nothing with them was ever standard. Commander Price called a meeting in the main logistics office. He stood at the front of the room with a nervous smile on his face. Grace sat in the back, as always, and watched. "The commander has requested additional fuel rations beyond what the treaty allows," Price said. "I'll be handling the negotiations personally. This is an opportunity to show our diplomatic skills." Amy raised her hand. "Sir, they are known for being difficult. Should we request security backup?" "That won't be necessary," Price said with false confidence. "I've studied their culture extensively. I know how to handle them." Grace said nothing. She had seen many officers like Price during the war. They read books about alien species and thought that made them experts. They had never smelled blood or heard their war cries in the darkness of a burning ship. They did not understand that the respected actions, not words. The meeting ended, and everyone returned to their work. Grace continued filing her reports, but she kept one eye on the door. She had a feeling that something was going to go wrong. 2 hours later, the door to the logistics office burst open. The commander stormed in with 4 of his warriors behind him. He was enormous, nearly 7 feet tall, with scars covering his face and arms. His eyes burned with anger. "Where is your commander?" roared. His voice shook the walls. Price stepped forward. His face had gone pale, but he tried to maintain his diplomatic smile. "Commander, welcome. I'm sure we can resolve whatever issue." "You insult us," slammed his fist on a nearby desk, cracking it in half. "You offer us fuel rations fit for a cargo shuttle. We are warriors of the Empire. We fought beside your kind when the hegemony came to burn your worlds, and this is how you repay us." Price's voice shook. "The treaty specifies certain amounts. I'm afraid my hands are tied by regulations." Regulations stepped closer. He towered over Price and his warriors spread out behind him. Their hands moved toward their weapons. "We do not care about your regulations. We care about honor. We care about respect." The room had gone silent. Amy and Daniel had backed against the far wall. Other officers were frozen at their desks. Grace could see the fear in their eyes. None of them had ever faced a real threat before. They had lived their whole lives in safety, protected by people they would never meet. Price tried again. "Perhaps if we contact the station commander." "Enough," grabbed Price by the collar and lifted him off the ground. "You waste my time with words. Perhaps I should teach you what to do to those who disrespect us." The warriors drew their blades. The room filled with the sound of screaming as officers dove under their desks. This was about to become a bloodbath. Then Grace stood up. She walked slowly toward, her footsteps calm and steady. The warriors turned to face her, their blades ready, dropped Price and stared at this small human woman who dared to approach him. Grace stopped a few feet away from. She looked up at him without fear. Then she spoke in perfect battle tongue. "Ethna in Salem." The words hung in the air. Eyes went wide. His warriors froze. Grace had just spoken a greeting that only warriors who had shed blood together were allowed to use. It was sacred among them. No outsider should know it. Studied her face. His eyes moved to the old burned scars on her hands, scars that disappeared beneath her sleeves. He looked at the way she stood, balanced and ready despite her limp. He looked into her eyes and saw something there that made his breath catch. "It cannot be," he whispered in his own language. Grace answered him in the same tongue. "It can, it is." Asked her one question, a single word that meant everything to his people. A name, a place, a battle that had shaped the course of the war. Grace answered with one word. Dropped to one knee. His warriors stared in shock, then followed their commander, falling to their knees before this small, gray-haired human woman. The room had gone completely silent. No one understood what was happening. Spoke, his voice now filled with respect. "We did not know, forgive us, we did not recognize you." "There is nothing to forgive," Grace said quietly. "Rise, you shame yourselves by kneeling." Stood, he looked at her with something close to wonder. "The fuel rations are acceptable. We will take what the treaty offers and be grateful." He turned to his warriors. "We leave, now." They walked out of the office without another word. The door closed behind them, and the room remained silent. Commander Price scrambled to his feet. His uniform was torn and his face was red with shame and confusion. "What just happened? What did you say to them?" Grace did not answer. She walked back to her desk and sat down. She opened her supply reports and began working as if nothing had happened. Price followed her. "Lieutenant Commander, I asked you a question. What language was that? How do you know battle tongue?" "I learned it during the war," Grace said without looking up. "The situation is resolved. I suggest we return to work." Price stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He wanted to demand more answers, but something in Grace's calm voice stopped him. There was authority there, an authority that he had never noticed before. He retreated to his office and closed the door. The other officers slowly emerged from their hiding places. They stared at Grace with new eyes. Amy and Daniel exchanged confused glances. The old woman they had mocked for weeks had just stopped a commander with words alone. She had made warriors kneel. The diplomat had watched everything from the doorway. He had seen the recognition in his eyes, the respect that bordered on worship. He had heard the word that Grace had spoken. He knew that name. Everyone who had lived through the hegemony war knew that name. It was a battle that had changed everything, and only a handful of humans had survived it. returned to his quarters and began searching through records. He had been right about Grace. There was a story here, and he was determined to find it. Meanwhile, Grace continued filing her reports. Her hands were steady and her face showed nothing. But inside, old memories were stirring. Memories of fire and death and the screams of friends who would never grow old. She had spent 15 years trying to forget. Now the past was reaching for her again, and she knew that it would not let go easily. She looked at the crack in the desk where had struck it. Such a small thing, such a small reminder of violence. She had seen so much worse. She had done so much worse. And soon, everyone would know. Lieutenant Amy could not sleep. The image of warriors kneeling before Grace played over and over in her mind. It made no sense. Grace was nobody, just an old woman filing reports in the back of the office. How could she make alien warriors kneel with a single word? Amy sat up in her quarters and turned on her terminal. She had access to personnel files as part of her administrative duties. She would find Grace's service record and discover her secret. Maybe Grace had family connections to the... Maybe she had bribed them somehow. There had to be an explanation that made sense. She typed in the access codes and searched for Grace's file. The basic information came up first. Name, age, rank, current assignment. Nothing special. But when Amy tried to access the full service history, a warning appeared on her screen. Classified, security clearance level required, Admiral. Amy frowned. Why would a logistics officer have an Admiral-level classified file? She tried again with different access codes. The same warning appeared, but this time, fragments of information slipped through, partial records that her clearance allowed her to see. Amy began to read. As she read, her face went pale. Service record fragment. Lieutenant Commander Grace Ellen, sole survivor of USS Valor at the Battle of Reach. Ship destroyed with all hands. Subject recovered from escape pod after 17 days adrift. Amy's hands began to shake. She kept reading. Service record fragment. Subject commanded ground defense during the siege of New Boston Colony. Held defensive position for 47 days against hegemony forces. Beginning strength, 300 civilians, 12 Marines. Hegemony attacking force, estimated 4,000 ground troops with orbital support. Colony held until relief fleet arrived. Civilian casualties, minimal. Subject personally credited with 37 confirmed enemy kills. Amy felt sick. She had called this woman a coward. She had said Grace survived by hiding while real soldiers fought. And all along, Grace had held a colony with 12 Marines against thousands of enemies for 47 days. But the records continued, and each fragment was worse than the last. Service record fragment. Subject responsible for destruction of hegemony dreadnought World Ender. Method classified at highest level. Estimated enemy casualties, 12,000. Action credited with turning the tide at the Second Battle of the World Ender. Amy remembered that name from her academy classes. It had been the largest hegemony warship ever built, a monster that could destroy entire fleets by itself. Its destruction had been a mystery. No one knew exactly how it had happened. The records simply said it had exploded during battle. And Grace had done it. Somehow, this quiet old woman had destroyed a ship that had killed tens of thousands of humans. Amy kept reading, her eyes wet with tears she did not understand. Service record fragment, decorations awarded, Solar Cross with clusters, Medal of Terra, Crimson Star. These are the 3 highest military honors that humanity can bestow. Subject has declined public ceremonies for all awards. Service record fragment. Subject credited with saving an estimated 2 million civilian lives across multiple engagements during the Hegemony War. Service record fragment. Subject was offered promotion to admiral rank. Subject declined. Requested assignment to any position where I can be useful. Amy closed the file. She sat in the darkness of her quarters and tried to understand what she had learned. Grace was not a failure. She was not a relic sent to wait for retirement. She was a hero, not just a hero. She was one of the greatest heroes humanity had ever produced. And Amy had spent weeks mocking her. The next morning, the fragments of Grace's record spread through the station like fire. Amy told Daniel, and Daniel told others, and within hours everyone knew some piece of the truth. Officers who had ignored Grace now stared at her with wide eyes. They pulled up old war footage on their terminals and searched for her name. They found recordings from New Boston. A younger Grace standing on the burning ruins of a defensive wall, her uniform torn and bloody, shouting orders to exhausted Marines. Behind her, civilians huddled in shelters while hegemony forces advanced. The recording showed Grace picking up a fallen soldier's rifle and moving toward the enemy. The feed cut out, but the historical records showed that the line had held. They found her name in academy textbooks. The siege of New Boston was required study for all tactical officers, but the textbooks never mentioned Grace by name. They simply referred to the colony commander who had organized the defense. They found interviews with survivors of Reach, old men and women who spoke of the battle with tears in their eyes. One veteran said that he had served on a ship near the Valor when it was destroyed. He said he had watched the escape pods launch. Only one pod had made it through the debris field, one survivor out of 400 crew members. That survivor was Grace. The diplomat contacted on the warship before it left the system. The conversation was brief. "Tell me about the human Grace," said. "Tell me why your warriors knelt before her." Was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft with respect. "During the war, my battalion was trapped on a moon called Shadow. The hegemony had surrounded us. Our own commanders had written us off as dead. They sent no rescue. We had 3 days of supplies left and no hope." What happened? She happened, Grace. She was commanding a small patrol ship nearby. When she heard our distress signal, she ignored orders from her own fleet. She flew into the hegemony blockade alone. Her ship was destroyed, but she managed to crash it into the enemy command vessel, disrupting their communications. In the confusion, she landed on the moon with nothing but a pistol and a medical kit. Paused. She found us, 200 warriors wounded and dying. She treated our injuries with human medicine. She showed us escape routes through the caves. She led us to safety while hegemony patrols hunted us. It took 17 days. She did not sleep. She did not eat. When we finally reached friendly lines, she collapsed and did not wake for 3 days. And your people remember this. My people will never forget. Among she is known as the human who would not die. She saved 200 warriors who had been abandoned by everyone else. We owe her a debt that can never be repaid. Ended the call and sat in silence. He understood now why Grace worked quietly in a logistics office and said nothing about her past. He understood why she did not react when young officers mocked her. When you have saved millions of lives and watched thousands of friends die, the opinions of children do not matter. He recorded everything he had learned for the archives. His people collected stories of great warriors from all species. Grace's story would be preserved forever among the greatest legends of the galaxy. Back in the logistics office, Grace noticed the change. People no longer laughed when she walked past. They stepped aside and lowered their eyes. Commander Price had not spoken to her directly since the incident. Amy looked at her with something like terror. Grace felt tired. She had hoped to finish her career in peace, doing simple work forgotten by everyone. But the past had found her again. It always did. She continued filing her reports. The numbers and charts were simple and clean. They did not remind her of blood and fire. They did not remind her of the faces of friends who would never grow old. But she knew that everything would be different now. The quiet life she had wanted was gone, and she would have to face the weight of her own legend once more. The station changed overnight. Where there had been mockery, there was now silence. Where there had been contempt, there was now fear. Grace walked through the corridors and watched officers press themselves against walls to let her pass. They saluted her with trembling hands. They could not meet her eyes. She hated it. Commander Price requested a meeting with her in his office. Grace walked in and found him standing nervously behind his desk. His face was pale, and his hands would not stop moving. "Lieutenant Commander," he began. "Grace, I want to apologize. I had no idea who you were. If I had known." "If you had known," Grace said quietly, "you would have treated me differently. You would have given me respect because of my record, not because I earned it. That tells me everything I need to know about you." Price opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. "I do not need your apology," Grace continued. "I do not want special treatment. I came here to do a job, and I will continue to do that job. You can either let me work in peace or you can transfer me somewhere else. Those are your choices." She turned and walked out of his office. Price stood alone, feeling smaller than he had ever felt in his life. Later that day, Amy approached Grace's desk. The young woman's face was red with shame. Her hands twisted together as she struggled to find words. "Lieutenant Commander," Amy said, "I need to tell you how sorry I am. The things I said about you, the way I treated you, if I had known." Grace looked up from her work. "If you had known what? That I was famous, that I had medals." "Well, yes, no, you treated me badly because you thought I was nobody," Grace said. Her voice was calm but firm. "You mocked me because I was old and walked with a limp. You assumed I was a failure because I worked quietly and did not boast about my past." Amy's eyes filled with tears. "I was wrong, I'm so sorry." "You were not wrong to treat me badly because I was someone important. You were wrong to treat anyone badly at all." Grace leaned forward slightly. "There is a young ensign in the engineering department named. He cleans the air filters and maintains the water recyclers. You have probably never noticed him. You probably walk past him every day without a word. But without him, everyone on this station would die within a week." Amy blinked. She had no idea who Grace was talking about. "Learn to see people," Grace said. "Not their ranks or their records, see them as people. That is the lesson here, not that you should be kind to heroes, that you should be kind to everyone." Amy nodded slowly. She wiped her eyes and walked away without another word. Grace watched her go and wondered if the lesson would stick. Some people learned from their mistakes. Others simply found new ways to make them. That evening, the diplomat came to Grace's quarters. She let him in and offered him water, which was the appropriate gesture of hospitality among his people. He accepted it with a slight bow. "I have compiled a record of your service history," said. "Among my people, you would be considered a living legend, a warrior whose story would be taught to children for generations. I would like your permission to add your record to the archives." Grace sat down heavily in her chair. "Why? The war is over. Those stories belong to the past." "Stories do not belong to the past," said. "They belong to everyone who hears them. They teach us what is possible. They show us what we can become." "I do not want to be a story." "You already are a story. You cannot change that. The only question is whether the story will be told correctly or whether it will be twisted by time and rumor." Grace was quiet for a long moment. She looked at them with tired eyes. "Tell me something. In your archives, do you record the names of those who died? Do you remember the soldiers who fell so that people like me could survive?" "We try to remember them all." "Then record their names first. Record my crew on the Valor, 400 people who died so that I could live. Record the 12 Marines at New Boston who held the line with me. 7 of them never came home. Record the warriors at Shadow. 60 of them died before we reached safety." Grace's voice cracked slightly. "Record them first. Then, if you have space left, you may record my name." Bow deeply. "It will be done as you ask." He left and Grace sat alone in the darkness. The names of the dead filled her mind as they did every night. She carried them with her always, a weight that never grew lighter. The next day, a young officer named approached her desk. He was fresh from the academy, maybe 20 years old, with earnest eyes and a nervous manner. Grace had seen him watching her for days but had said nothing. "Lieutenant Commander," said, "may I ask you something?" "Yes." "When the others were mocking you, why did you never say anything? Why did you let them treat you that way? You could have told them who you were. You could have made them show you respect." Grace set down her stylus and looked at the young man. "Sit down." He sat in the chair beside her desk, his back straight and his eyes wide. "I have buried 43 friends," Grace said. "Not colleagues, not acquaintances, friends, people I loved. I held some of them as they died. I watched others die on screens, unable to reach them. I spent 15 years in war, watching the best people I ever knew sacrifice everything so that others could live in peace." Swallowed hard, "I'm sorry. After all that, do you think I care if young officers laugh at me behind my back? Do you think their opinions matter compared to the weight I already carry?" Grace shook her head. "I did not survive the war to spend my remaining years demanding applause. I did not lose everything I loved so that I could argue with children about respect." "But they were wrong." "Yes, they were wrong, and perhaps they have learned something, or perhaps they have not. Either way, it does not change who I am or what I have done." Grace smiled sadly. "The dead do not care about medals, they do not care about fame. They only care that we live our lives worthy of their sacrifice. That is the only respect that matters." Sat in silence for a long moment, then he nodded slowly. "Thank you," he said. "I think I understand." He stood and returned to his desk. Grace watched him go and felt something like hope. Perhaps the young could still learn. Perhaps the sacrifices of the past could still shape the future. The station settled into a new normal. People still stared at Grace, but the fear began to fade. Some officers started to approach her with questions about her experiences. She answered when she felt like it and declined when she did not. No one pressured her. She continued her work in the logistics department. The supply reports and inventory lists were still waiting, and they did not care about her legend. They needed to be filed correctly, and Grace found comfort in that simple truth. But she knew the peace would not last. It never did. Somewhere out there, the universe was preparing another test, and when it came, she would be ready. She always was. 3 months passed on orbital station Artemis 7. Grace continued her work in the logistics department. The other officers had learned to treat her with quiet respect. Commander Price had requested a transfer to another station, unable to face her every day. Amy had begun volunteering at the station's Veteran Support Center. Daniel Grant kept his head down and said nothing to anyone. Life had settled into a comfortable routine. Grace filed her reports, ate her meals, and slept without too many nightmares. She had started to believe that she might actually find peace. Then the alarms began to scream. Red lights flashed throughout the station. Officers ran through corridors, shouting orders that no one seemed to understand. Grace stood up from her desk and walked calmly to the command center. Her leg ached, but she ignored it. The main screen showed a nightmare. 6 ships had emerged from uncharted space near a colony world called Haven's Rest. They were hegemony vessels, not pirates using stolen equipment. Actual hegemony warships with their distinctive black hulls and red markings. "That's impossible," someone whispered. "The hegemony was destroyed. The war ended 15 years ago." But the ships were real, and they were attacking. Haven's Rest had a population of 50,000 civilians and almost no defenses. The station's tactical officers stared at their screens with pale faces. They had studied war in simulations. They had never seen it in reality. Station Commander Laura stood at the center of the room, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Contact Fleet Command. Request immediate reinforcements, and someone tell me what we can do to help that colony." A young officer ran calculations on his screen. "Ma'am, the nearest fleet vessels are 6 hours away. Haven's Rest will be overrun in 2 hours at the current rate of attack. What about our defenses? Can we send our patrol ships? We have 4 patrol vessels, light weapons. They can't fight hegemony warships. Closed her eyes. Then we watch 50,000 people die, and there's nothing we can do. There might be something. Everyone turned. Grace stood at the entrance to the command center. She walked forward slowly, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. Lieutenant Commander said, "This is a combat situation, you're not." "I know what this is." Grace studied the enemy formation. The hegemony remnants are using a standard siege pattern. They expect no resistance because the colony has no military assets. They're not prepared for a fight. Stared at her. "What are you suggesting?" "Give me command of the 4 patrol ships and any armed shuttles we have. Contact the warship that left here 3 months ago. They're still in range and they owe me a favor. Coordinate with the colony's civil defense to prepare evacuation routes and shelter positions." "That's insane. 4 patrol ships against 6 hegemony warships." Grace turned to face the station commander. There was something in her eyes that had never seen before, something cold and hard and absolutely certain. "I have done more with less," Grace said quietly. "The hegemony thinks they're attacking a helpless target. They do not know that I am here. That is an advantage we can use." Hesitated. She looked around at her tactical officers, who stood frozen and useless. Then she looked at Grace, the woman who had destroyed the world ender and held New Boston against impossible odds. "What do you need?" Grace began issuing orders. Within minutes, the station transformed into a military command center. Officers who had never faced combat suddenly found themselves with clear tasks and a calm voice guiding them. The 4 patrol ships launched under Grace's direction. Armed shuttles followed. A message was sent to S warship. The response came back immediately. "We are on our way. The human who would not die calls, we answer." Grace coordinated the defense from the station's command center. She did not command from the front this time. Her body was too old for that, but her mind was still sharp, and she saw the battle as clearly as if she were standing in the middle of it. The patrol ships engaged the hegemony forces, not trying to destroy them but to confuse them. They darted in and out of range, firing at sensors and communication arrays. The hegemony commanders grew frustrated. They broke formation to chase the annoying gnats. That was when they arrived. S warship slammed into the scattered hegemony forces like a hammer. They fought with savage fury, remembering their old hatred for the enemy who had nearly destroyed them. 2 hegemony vessels were crippled in the first minutes of engagement. Grace watched the battle unfold and made small adjustments. She directed the patrol ships to protect the flanks. She coordinated with Haven's Rest to evacuate civilians from the most dangerous areas. She managed a dozen different elements of the fight with quiet efficiency. The battle lasted 2 hours. When it ended, 4 hegemony ships had been destroyed and 2 had fled into uncharted space. Haven's Rest had suffered damage, but civilian casualties were minimal. They had lost warriors, and Grace felt each death like a knife in her heart. But 50,000 people were alive because of what she had done. The media arrived within hours. Ships from every major news network swarmed the station, demanding interviews with the hero who had saved Haven's Rest. They called Grace a legend returned. They called her humanity's greatest warrior. Grace refused to speak with them. She returned to her desk in the logistics department and began filing the supply reports that had piled up during the crisis. Young found her there, working as if nothing had happened. "Lieutenant Commander," he said, "the reporters want to talk to you. The station commander wants to give you a medal. Fleet Command is offering you any position you want. A return to combat duty, a promotion, anything." Grace did not look up from her screen. "Tell them no." "No to what?" "No to all of it." She finished one report and started another. I already have the job I wanted, a job where I can be useful without anyone else having to die under my command. Did not understand, but you saved those people, you're a hero. Grace finally looked at him. Her eyes were tired but gentle. I was a soldier. I did what needed to be done because I was the one who could do it. That does not make me special. It makes me lucky, or unlucky depending on how you look at it. She returned to her work, stood there for a moment, then walked away. He would think about her words for years to come. That evening, the young officers of the logistics department sent Grace a message. They invited her to have dinner with them, not as a legend, not as a hero, just as a colleague they wanted to know better. Grace accepted. She joined them in the station's mess hall, sitting at a table surrounded by faces she had worked beside for months. They asked her questions, not about battles or medals, but about herself. What books did she like? What music? Did she have family waiting for her somewhere? Grace answered slowly at first, then more easily. She told them about her mother, who had died before the war. She told them about a dog she had loved as a child. She told them small, ordinary stories that had nothing to do with death and everything to do with life. The young officers listened and laughed and shared their own stories. For a few hours, Grace was not a legend. She was just a person, sitting with friends, remembering what it felt like to be ordinary. The watched from across the room. He observed the way the humans gathered around Grace, the way they leaned in when she spoke, the way they smiled when she smiled. He recorded one final note for the archives. The humans do not simply breed warriors. They breed warriors who become kind. They take their strongest, their most deadly, and they teach them gentleness. This perhaps is why they are so dangerous. They know that true strength lies not in the ability to destroy, but in the choice not to. They know that the greatest heroes are not those who seek glory, but those who seek peace. I have studied many species across many worlds. I have never seen anything quite like humanity. They terrify me. And they give me hope. Grace finished her meal and said good night to her colleagues. She walked back to her quarters through the quiet corridors of the station. Earth glowed blue through the viewing windows, and the stars stretched out forever in the darkness. She thought about the friends she had lost and the ones she had saved. She thought about the wars she had fought and the peace she had won. She thought about the life she had lived and the life that still remained. Tomorrow there would be more supply reports to file, more inventory lists to check, more small, ordinary tasks that kept the station running, and that was enough. That was more than enough. Grace, the human who would not die, went to sleep without nightmares for the first time in 15 years.